Hi everyone and welcome back to Newegg TV. My name is Paul and today I'm going to be doing an unboxing and overview on this new motherboard from Gigabyte. This is the Gigabyte Z77X-UD5H. So here's a closer look at the box, and for starters, of course, we have the big Z77 right here, which is the newest chipset from Intel. It's designed to go along with the soon-to-be released, or maybe already released, depending when you watch this video, Ivy Bridge series of Intel processors, also known as the third generation Core i3, i5, and i7 processors. It still uses the GA-1155 socket, so it is backwards compatible with your Sandy Bridge processors if you're using one of those. Likewise, you can also drop an Ivy Bridge processor into an older GA-1155 P67 or Z68 motherboard. You'll just get a few more features with the Z77. So this does feature unlocked performance, so if you drop a K-SKU CPU in here, you can use it for overclocking. They've done a lot with the 3D power. They have an all-digital engine to provide power to stuff like your CPU, the integrated GPU, and your memory. And also the UD in this stands for the Ultra Durable series of Gigabyte motherboards. This is UD4, which they've added a few more features to, such as this new class of new glass fabric PCB, which gives you some features such as allowing for higher thermal protection. It also protects against humidity, electrostatic protection, power failure protection, and of course still features the double the copper PCB that they're using in the construction of the motherboard itself. Just a few more icons over here to the left. It of course supports NVIDIA SLI technology if you're going to go with a 2-card SLI solution or a 2-card Crossfire X solution for AMD. Supports both of those. Also has an MCA connector on board. You get PCI Express Gen 3 if you're using an Ivy Bridge processor. Then of course the Z77 chipset. We have some more information here on the back. Mostly stuff I've already talked about, so all digital power. You get a dual UEFI BIOS with this motherboard, so you can set up all your settings in one BIOS. You can switch over to the other and maybe go for your overclocking features or that sort of thing. Also gives you a bit more security as you're flashing your BIOS, because you'll always have a backup one to revert to in case something goes wrong during a BIOS update. All the other stuff on here I've mostly mentioned, although you also do get Intel Smart Response over here. The features in Z77 allow for some of the features built into the Ivy Bridge processor, such as Smart Response, which is SSD caching, and you also get the Intel's next generation of QuickSync 2.0, which allows for faster video encoding if you're using the GPU integrated into the Ivy Bridge processor. You also get Creative Sound Blaster X5 MB2 audio, and you get dual LAN ports. You get one Intel LAN and one Qualcomm Atheros LAN port. So next up, an unboxing, and I also wanted to mention that the UD5H also comes in UD5H Wi-Fi, which also gives you a add-on Wi-Fi card included in the box, so you guys can check out that one as well. There's the motherboard itself, which I'm going to come back to in just a moment, because we have lots of accessories to go over with first of all, and starting with the Z77X-UD5H installation manual. Keep that on hand while you're doing your build. Inside you also get a Gigabyte installation driver and utility DVD that will have the drivers that were available at the time this disc was made, which usually means that there's updated drivers available on the Gigabyte website, so head over there to download them. You also get a multilingual installation guidebook, so if English is not your first language, that should help out. You get an SLI bridge. You get a nice long SLI bridge, which looks like it will cover probably, looks like a 3 or 4 slot SLI bridge, so if you're going to space out your cards, it will still work. It's flexible, so it'll still work if you put the cards right next to each other too. You get an input-output shield there for the back of your case. You get some serial ATA cables. You get 4 of them total. All of them have nice little metal brackets. All of them will be compatible with SATA revision 1, 2, or 3 devices. And the blue ones here, you get one with straight plugs on both ends, and one with a straight plug and a angled plug, and same with the black one. So 4 serial ATA cables there total. You get a Gigabyte powered case badge. And finally, you get a USB 3.0 front panel bracket. That's a 3.5-inch front panel bracket, so you can fit that on the front of your case if you don't have USB 3 on the front, and feeds over there to a 20-pin USB 3.0 header, which you can plug directly into your motherboard. So here's a look at the UD5H overall. As you can see, Gigabyte has gone with a black, blue, and silver color scheme. This is all done on a flat black PCB. I'll flip it around here to the back so you guys can get a better look. They've also gone with Phillips head spring-loaded screws to mount all of the cooling heat sinks on the board, so you can remove those if necessary. Moving back to the front, I real quick want to point out all of the system fan headers. There are 5 of them total. They're all 4-pin. They're scattered around. So starting at the top here, you got your main CPU fan header, a system fan header here at the top left, another system fan header over here by the Dimm Slots, another system fan header down here by your SATA ports, and one more down here in the bottom middle right next to the front panel connectors. Now to go over all the features here in detail, we're going to start in the bottom right, and you have a couple USB 3.0 headers right here. These are 20-pin headers. Each of them will power 2 USB 3.0 ports, and there's actually another one right up here next to the power port. So that gives you up to 6 add-on USB 3.0 ports. 2 of these are actually controlled by the Z77 chipset itself, and I believe it is this one right here, only because the other add-on USB 3.0 ports are controlled by a VIA chipset, which I believe are these, and I believe that's the VIA chip for that, which is tucked right there under the corner of the heatsink. Moving along, we have a SATA port right here. That is a SATA Revision 3 port. It's actually shared with a Marvell controller that also controls the eSATA port on the back of the board, and that's a Marvell 88SE9172 chip controlling that. Next to that, we can see a switch, and that's your BIOS switch. So you have an actual switch here. You can switch back and forth. It's that easy. In the right position there, it's your default BIOS. Once you get that set up and good to go, you can power the system off, switch over to the left side, and then they'll give you a fresh BIOS, and you can do all your overclocking and easily switch back to your default settings if necessary. Here's your front panel connectors. They're housed in casing. They're also color-coded to help you plug them in more easily. The aforementioned system fan header. A couple USB 2.0 front panel headers. The red one there indicates that it is the special power USB 2.0 header, so it will give power even while the system is turned off, and also gives additional power to charge devices more quickly. Here is a TPM header if you're into that sort of thing. You also get a FireWire header right there under the plastic protective cover, a SPDIF pinout right there, and finally front panel audios. Here's all of your sound hardware over here on the left side for your built-in sound card. And next up, let's talk about the PCI Express slots. As you can see, they're all arrayed right here, the black plugs. And you're going to have different functionality with these based on what kind of processor you actually install. If you go with a Intel Generation 2 or 2nd Gen Sandy Bridge processor, you will have PCI Express Gen 2 or 2.1 functionality from these slots, and you actually lose the ability to use this lowest slot right here because there's not quite enough PCI Express lanes in the Sandy Bridge processors. If you go with a 3rd generation Ivy Bridge processor, that will up all of these to PCI Express Gen 3, which effectively doubles the bandwidth of PCI Express Gen 2. That being said, you get 1, 2, 3 X1 PCI Express slots right there, one at the very top, and if you do happen to get the Wi-Fi enabled version of this board, that's where you plug in your Wi-Fi card, or at least that's a good place to plug it in because it will be out of the way of your video cards. 2 more down here, they do have triple slot spacing between the full-length PCI Express slots. So here's your one primary full-length PCI Express physically X16 slot, also wired up for full X16, and then down here in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th slot is your PCI Express 8-speed port right there. Again, 2.0 of Sandy Bridge, 3.0 of Ivy Bridge, and that is where you install your 2 video cards if you're going to go with a Crossfire X or an SLI solution. You have a legacy PCI port here if you're hanging on to an old PCI device that you need to plug in. And then finally at the bottom you get another full-length 16 PCI Express slot. It is wired up for X4 though, so that's the max speed you're going to get out of that. And again, just based on this sticker being right here, that's only going to work if you use a 3rd Gen Ivy Bridge processor. To the right of the PCI Express slots, we have this Gigabyte heat spreader there, and that is right above your Z77 chipset. The Z77 chipset controls a lot of things on the board, such as the USB 3.0 ports that I mentioned earlier, also several of these serial ATA ports. So you have 8 serial ATA ports here that are side-facing, so they won't conflict with your graphics cards. The 6 on the left are all controlled by the Z77 chipset. White ones here are SATA Revision 3, 6 gigabit per second. Black ones here are SATA Revision 2, 3 gigabits per second. Also, there's a sticker on top of those indicating if you actually lose the functionality of SATA to port 5 if you use the M-SATA port, which is up there, which I'm going to come back to in just a second. Finally, get a couple more add-on SATA revision 3 6 gigabit per second ports right there. The gray ones, again, controlled by an add-on chip, a Marvell 88SE9172, same one as the eSATA and that gray port at the bottom of the board. This right here is actually a SATA power port. So you'll need to plug in a SATA plug from your power supply, just your standard 4-pin power port there coming from the power supply. That's recommended. You don't need to plug it in if you're just running a single card video card solution, but if you're running dual card SLI or Crossfire X, they recommend you plug in that for some extra juice to be delivered over to the PCI Express ports. Moving up the side of the board now, we have your primary 24-pin motherboard power connector for your power supply. Up here on the top right, you have a debug LED, which is fantastic for troubleshooting if you're having any difficulties getting your system up and running. Surface-mounted power button right there, so very handy if you do an outside-of-the-box test build before you assemble your system. You also get onboard reset switch and a clear CMOS button right there that you can use to clear out your BIOS and go back to default settings. Next up are your DIMM slots. You get dual-channel memory capabilities from this motherboard. You get 4 DIMM slots here for DDR3 memory. It supports recommended 1.5 volt DDR3 DIMMs. Can support 8 gig DIMMs in these ports, in these DIMM slots, so you can actually do up to 32 gigabytes of memory if you go with 8 gig DIMMs. And it supports DDR3 speeds up to 1600 megatransfers per second. Now over here is our 1155 socket. But real quick, I wanted to point out right below this is an M-SATA port. M-SATA is actually a mini PCI Express plug, and you can sort of see it right there, that's been rewired for SATA. What you can do here is you can actually install an M-SATA solid-state drive, and that works fantastically in combination with either a Sandy Bridge or an Ivy Bridge processor, because that will enable Intel's QuickSync technology. So you can cache data to the SSD that you have plugged in right there. You can use that to accelerate the performance of a mechanical hard drive that you also have plugged into your native serial ATA ports. Above that, we have the 1155 socket right there with its protective cover. Make sure you hang on to that cover if you ever need to return the board. Again, this will support both second-generation Intel Core processors, a.k.a. Sandy Bridge, or third-generation Intel Core processors, a.k.a. Ivy Bridge. Above that, you can see your VRM area right here. That will deliver power to the processor as well as the integrated GPU in the Ivy Bridge CPU, as well as your memory DIMMs over here. As you can see, they put some pretty beefy heat sinks on those. They're sort of an anodized blue aluminum. And there's a heat pipe that runs from the very top heat spreader here down to the one on the left, and then all the way down to the Z77 chipset. So whichever cooler is the coolest is where the heat is going to go to help be dissipated. Finally, in the top left here is your 8-pin supplemental CPU power connector for EPS power. Make sure you have that one plugged in, especially if you're going to be overclocking your motherboard. It's hard to get by without it. Let's finish off with our inputs and outputs here on the side of the board. Sandy Bridge and Ivy Bridge processors have an integrated graphics core, as you've probably heard, and so here are the video outs for if you have a Sandy Bridge or Ivy Bridge processor with a graphics core installed. Bear in mind there are versions that don't have graphics cores, in which case these ports won't be used, but here you have a 15-pin D-sub out for VGA. You also have a DVI out for DVI plug. You also have HDMI and DisplayPort. At the top here you have an optical Toslink out for optical digital audio. You also have a couple red USB 2.0 ports here. Again, those will always be on even if the system is powered off, so you can use those for charging. You also have a FireWire port. There's the last serial ATA port. It's an eSATA port. It's not powered, but it will give you data connectivity, and again, that's SATA revision 3, 6 gigabit per second. Here are your two Ethernet ports. Again, you get an Intel and an Atheros gigabit LAN ports right there. So Intel, generally speaking, is going to be a bit better, but it gives you the option to use either one or use both together for your networking needs. 4 more USB 3.0 ports down there at the bottom. Again, with those are controlled by VIA add-on chips. And then finally, you get your analog 7.1 channel audio outs. And that's going to wrap it up for this video. Once again, this has been the Gigabyte Z77X-UD5H motherboard featuring the 1155 socket for Intel 2nd or 3rd generation Core i3, i5, and i7 processors, as well as the Z77 chipset. I'm Paul with Newegg TV. If you enjoyed today's video, please head over to our Newegg YouTube channel and don't forget to subscribe for more tech videos. Thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you next time.